done? What came over me? Who am I?
Sally Field's story doesn't begin under the bright lights of Hollywood, but in the quiet streets of Pasadena, California, where her childhood was anything but ordinary. Born on November 6, 1946, Sally entered a world that seemed glamorous on the surface. Her mother, Margaret Field, was a Paramount actress, while her father, Richard Dryden Field, was a decorated World War II veteran. But behind the appearances of prestige, her home was fragile, marked by emotional distance and unspoken wounds. By the time she was just 4 years old, her parents' marriage collapsed. Divorce was rare in the 1950s, and for young Sally, the split felt like the ground beneath her had been taken away. Instead of stability, she found herself in a home reshaped by silence. Her mother remarried to Jock Mahoney, a stuntman admired by the public for his charm and daring spirit. To the outside world, he was magnetic, handsome, confident, larger than life. But behind closed doors, Sally later revealed he was something entirely different. In her 2018 memoir, In Pieces, Sally exposed the devastating truth. Mahoney crossed boundaries no child should ever endure. She described moments of deep violation, wounds that left no bruises on her skin, but carved deep scars inside her spirit. Yet perhaps what cut the deepest wasn't his actions, but her mother's silence. Sally often described herself as a child screaming on the inside, but no one was listening. That silence became the language of her home. Instead of laughter, instead of safety, there was distance. And in that suffocating stillness, she began to look for a way out. Acting wasn't ambition, it was survival. On film sets where her mother worked, Sally would watch actors speak truths that were forbidden inside her own home. In the classroom, she found refuge in drama class, where stepping into another role meant escaping the frightened little girl she carried inside. Acting let me be someone who didn't feel afraid, she would later confess, and that small discovery became the lifeline that would one day lead her out of the shadows. But even as Sally began to glimpse a way forward, darker trials were waiting. And what happened in her teenage years would test her strength in ways no child should ever face.
By the early 1960s, Sally Field was just another high school student in California, juggling teenage life with the secret storms she carried inside. But fate has a way of finding the most unlikely people. At a casual school party, a talent scout spotted her, not the wounded girl she felt like, but the spark in her presence. He invited her to audition at Columbia Studios, and that simple invitation cracked open a door that would change her life forever. At 18 years old, Sally landed her first leading role in the television series Gidget. Overnight, she became America's sunny surfer girl, carefree, cheerful, and filled with light. Fan letters poured in by the hundreds, and to the public, she seemed to embody the perfect image of youthful innocence. But for Sally, Gidget was never about fame or glamour. It was survival dressed as success. Yet the role came with a hidden cost. Hollywood had quickly decided what box Sally Field belonged in. Cute, bubbly, harmless. It was a label she couldn't shake. 2 years later, in 1967, she was cast as Sister Bertrill in The Flying Nun. Wearing a wide-brimmed habit and soaring across television screens, she became a household name. The show catapulted her into fame, but to Sally, it felt like a cage. To audiences, she was America's sweetheart. To producers, she was the eternal girl next door, lightweight, simple, and predictable. Each smile, each laugh that charmed millions, left Sally feeling emptier inside. She knew she had depth that nobody seemed willing to see. The pressure built until she made a decision that shocked nearly everyone around her. At the peak of her television success, she walked away. For almost 3 years, from 1968 to 1971, she refused every sitcom role offered to her. Instead of chasing fame, she turned inward, enrolling in the legendary Lee Strasberg's Actors Studio in New York. There, she stripped away everything the industry had forced on her. She dove into the raw, grueling discipline of method acting, confronting her own grief, her own trauma, and her own voice. While Hollywood scoffed, dismissing her as a one-hit wonder who would soon fade into obscurity, Sally was quietly remaking herself from the inside out. But the risk nearly broke her. At times, she doubted if she even belonged in Hollywood. At times, she imagined walking away for good, taking a waitressing job rather than selling a version of herself that felt false. And yet, she held on. She stayed in the fire, letting it forge her into something new. And just when the world was ready to forget her, Sally Field returned with a performance that stunned critics, silenced doubters, and proved that she was no lightweight at all.
For years, Hollywood dismissed Sally Field as nothing more than a sweet-faced sitcom star. But in 1976, she shattered that image in a way nobody saw coming. That year, she took on the role of a lifetime in the TV movie Sybil, a raw, unsettling psychological drama about a young woman living with multiple personalities, each born from the cracks of a traumatic childhood. It wasn't just acting, it was transformation. Sally embodied 13 different selves, each with its own voice, mannerisms, fragility, and history. Critics described the performance as breathtaking. Audiences were stunned, left questioning how the same actress who once wore a flying nun's habit could now channel such depth, such anguish, and such truth. The role earned Sally her first Emmy Award, but more than that, it earned her respect. Overnight, she had rewritten her career. No longer the lightweight girl next door, she was now a serious actress capable of carrying the heaviest of roles. And yet, beneath the applause, Sally confessed she had been terrified. Terrified that she would fail, terrified that Hollywood would never see her as anything but the smiling face they'd branded her to be. But Sybil changed everything. It proved that her strength as an actress came not from charm or beauty, but from scars she refused to hide. Sally herself later admitted that she poured her own buried grief into the role, using her pain as fuel for art. It was as if all the silence of her childhood, all the invisibility of her early career, had finally found a voice. The industry could no longer ignore her, but this was only the beginning. Just 3 years later, Sally Field would take on a role that didn't just prove her talent, it would win her the highest honor Hollywood could give.
The 1970s had been a proving ground, but in 1979, Sally Field reached a summit few thought she would ever touch. At 33 years old, she starred in Norma Rae, the story of a Southern textile worker who dares to stand up against union injustices. On screen, Sally was electric, unpolished, gritty, and fiercely real. She wasn't just acting, she was channeling every ounce of fight she had carried from childhood into adulthood. The performance struck a nerve. Critics hailed it as unforgettable, and audiences felt something deeper than entertainment. They saw truth. That year, Sally stood on the Academy Awards stage, clutching her first Oscar for Best Actress. It was a victory born not of luck, but of years of rejection, typecasting, and quiet battles against being underestimated. But Sally didn't stop there. 5 years later, in 1984, she returned with another powerhouse performance in Places in the Heart. This time, she played a widowed mother struggling to keep her farm alive during the Great Depression. To prepare, she immersed herself in rural life, learning the rhythms, hardships, and exhaustion her character would have known. The result was another triumph, her second Academy Award for Best Actress. And it was during that acceptance speech that she gave Hollywood one of its most famous Oscar moments. Her voice broke with emotion as she exclaimed, "You like me! Right now, you like me!" It wasn't just a line, it was a release, a cry from someone who had spent her entire career fighting to be seen, finally realizing the world recognized her worth. From there, Sally Field's versatility only grew. She made audiences laugh and cry as the grieving mother in Steel Magnolias, 1989. She brought humor and warmth to Mrs. Doubtfire, 1993, and in 1994, she delivered one of her most tender roles as Forrest Gump's devoted mother, a performance still quoted and remembered to this day. But perhaps one of her most underrated triumphs came much later, in 2012, when at 66 years old, she portrayed Mary Todd Lincoln in Steven Spielberg's Lincoln. She gained weight for the role, studied history with precision, and delivered a performance layered with fragility, strength, and tragedy. For that, she earned yet another Oscar nomination, proving that her artistry had no expiration date. Again and again, Sally Field fought against Hollywood's quiet prejudice against women beyond a certain age. Each role was not just a performance, but a battle cry, a reminder that complexity, depth, and brilliance don't fade with youth. Yet while her career soared to unimaginable heights, her personal life was often a battlefield of its own. Behind the glimmer of awards and applause, Sally endured heartbreaks, turbulent love affairs, and painful lessons that shaped her just as deeply as her roles ever did.
For all the triumphs Sally Field achieved on screen, love in her personal life was far less kind. Her search for a steady partner became a long, winding journey, one filled with longing, disappointment, and the quiet ache of promises that never lasted. Her first marriage seemed like a safe harbor. In 1968, at just 22 years old, she married her high school sweetheart, Stephen Craig. At first, it felt like the ordinary happiness she had always craved, a home away from Hollywood chaos. Together, they had two sons, Peter and Eli, whose laughter filled her world with light. Motherhood gave Sally an anchor, a joy so fierce she often said it became her compass. But even joy couldn't mend the quiet cracks in the marriage. As Sally's career demanded more of her and Craig's ambitions pulled him elsewhere, distance crept in. By 1975, their marriage ended in divorce. There was no scandal, no headlines, just private grief and the sobering realization that even in a family she built herself, she could still feel invisible. Then came the relationship that would both ignite her and wound her most deeply, Burt Reynolds. They met on the set of Smokey and the Bandit in 1977, and the spark was immediate. To the public, they were Hollywood's golden couple. His rugged charisma and her luminous warmth made them the picture of glamour. But behind the red carpets was a different reality. Burt's insecurity often turned into control. He questioned her talent, dismissed her ambitions, and at times made her feel small. When Sally was offered the role of Norma Rae, the very performance that would earn her an Oscar, he told her she wasn't talented enough. And when she won, he refused to stand by her side at the Academy Awards. Years later, Sally admitted, "I was always trying to prove I was enough for him." Their relationship was a cycle of connection and pain, a storm she struggled to escape. When it finally ended in 1982, it wasn't because she stopped loving him. It was because for the first time, she chose to love herself more. Decades later, near the end of his life, Burt Reynolds called her and confessed, "You were the love of my life." But by then, the years had carved too much distance. In her memoir, she wrote simply, "It was too late." Her second marriage, to producer Alan Greisman in 1984, seemed to promise steadier waters. Together, they had her third son, Sam, in 1987, and for a while it felt different, calmer, more grounded. Years later, when Sam came out as gay, Sally embraced him with unconditional love,
becoming a fierce advocate for LGBTQ+ rights. But even that marriage couldn't last. By 1994, Sally walked away once again, this time out of self-preservation, not defeat. By the late 1980s, Sally Field had already endured heartbreak, rejection, and triumph. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened on October 29, 1988. That autumn day began like any other. Sally boarded a private jet in Aspen, Colorado, along with 3 family members. The air was crisp, the mountains still, and her thoughts were on simple things, dinner plans, the week ahead. Nothing extraordinary. But within seconds of takeoff, the ordinary dissolved into terror. The engines faltered, the aircraft shuddered, then gravity seized them. The jet plunged downward and slammed into another plane waiting on the runway. The sound was unearthly. Shrieking steel, splintering glass, the violent roar of metal crushing against metal. Inside the cabin, chaos exploded. Loose objects turned into weapons, smoke filled the air, and screams pierced the haze. Sally remembers hearing a voice, high and raw, echoing above the panic. For a moment, she didn't recognize it. Then she realized it was her own. Her chest locked against the seatbelt, her pulse hammering like a war drum, every second stretching into an eternity. And then, silence. A strange, suffocating quiet. Against all odds, Sally and her family survived, with only minor physical injuries. But not all wounds bleed. In the month that followed, the crash replayed in her mind like an unshakable reel. She saw the tilt of the wing, heard the dying gasp of the engines, felt her hands trembling as she fought to free herself from the belt. Publicly, she brushed it off, refusing to let survival become a spectacle. Privately, it changed her. "I thought, this is it. This is how my story ends," she later admitted. But it didn't end. And that realization became the turning point of her life. After the crash, everything looked different. The endless chase for Hollywood's approval, the sting of failed love, the weight of old wounds, all of it seemed smaller in the shadow of survival. Life, she realized, hung by the thinnest thread. Every moment after that day felt sacred. Her friends noticed it before she even spoke of it. Her voice softer but stronger, her patience deeper, her gaze carrying a new kind of gravity. She leaned into what mattered most. Slow breakfasts with her sons, afternoons in her garden, evenings watching old films without worrying how she looked on screen. The crash left no visible scars, but it carved an indelible truth into her. Survival is not just about living through the fall. It's about learning how to live after it. By the time Sally Field reached her 70s, she had lived through more storms than most people could imagine. A turbulent childhood, heartbreak in love, the brutality of Hollywood, and even a near-death experience. But in her later years, she found something she had been searching for all her life: peace. Today, Sally lives quietly in Pacific Palisades, in a modest 2,800 square foot home overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It isn't a mansion designed to impress, it's a sanctuary. Each corner of the house carries the traces of her journey, photographs, well-worn books, and family mementos that matter far more than red carpets ever did. Despite an estimated net worth of over $50 million, she chooses simplicity. She drives a Lexus hybrid, tends her garden, and keeps to a mostly plant-based diet. Yoga at sunrise keeps her steady, and she has often said that aging gracefully isn't about erasing time, but about meeting it with strength and acceptance. "Now the mirror reflects someone freer," she once said. "I've made peace with my past. Now I just love my grandkids." And family has become her greatest pride. Between her 3 sons, Peter, Eli, and Sam, and her 5 grandchildren, her life is now filled with laughter, warmth, and a kind of love that Hollywood could never offer. She spends afternoons planting flowers with little hands in the dirt beside her, or evenings reading bedtime stories with the same tenderness she once gave to her most iconic roles. But Sally didn't simply fade into quiet retirement, she became a voice, not just for her family, but for countless others. She has been an outspoken advocate for women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights, and climate change. When her youngest son, Sam, came out as gay, she embraced him fully, deepening her understanding of unconditional love. In 2012, she accepted the Human Rights Campaign's Ally for Equality Award, speaking with a voice that carried the gravity of lived experience. She marched for climate action alongside Jane Fonda in 2019, even risking arrest to make her voice heard. And when she speaks about reproductive rights, her words carry a resonance that comes not from theory, but from personal history and survival. Her health, too, tested her again. In 2005, she was diagnosed with osteoporosis, a condition that silently weakens the bones. Instead of hiding it, Sally launched her Rally with Sally campaign to raise awareness, determined to protect others from being blindsided. She adapted her own life with care, choosing walks over strain, practicing gentle yoga, and meeting each day's stiffness not with defeat, but with patience. And then, in 2018, she released her memoir, In Pieces. It was more than a book. It was a gift to the little girl she once was, the one silenced and unseen. It was a story of survival, of truth, and of finally reclaiming her own narrative. Now, in her late 70s, Sally Field spends her evenings on her deck, watching the waves roll in, sometimes with a cup of tea, sometimes with a grandchild tucked under her arm. The applause of Hollywood has faded into memory, but the sound of laughter at her table means far more. Her legacy isn't just 2 Oscars or decades of iconic roles. It's the proof that a woman who endured abandonment, heartbreak, and invisibility could rise, endure, and shine brighter than ever before. Not because of Hollywood, but in spite of it.
Sally Field's journey is not the story of a perfect Hollywood star. It is the story of survival, of a girl silenced in her own home who found her voice on stage, of a woman underestimated by an industry only to rise and win its highest honors, of a mother who endured heartbreak but built a family that became her anchor, and of a survivor who looked death in the face and chose to live with gratitude instead of fear. Her legacy is not just the 2 golden statues on her shelf or the unforgettable roles that shaped generations. It lives in the strength she modeled for anyone who has ever felt invisible. It lives in her activism, her voice for the silenced, her compassion for the vulnerable. And it lives in the quiet wisdom she carries today. That peace isn't found in applause, but in authenticity, in family, and in the courage to embrace your scars. Sally Field has shown us that pain can forge power, that beauty is not perfection, but truth, and that sometimes the greatest role you'll ever play is yourself. If her story has touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own resilience, share your thoughts in the comments. Which part of her journey spoke to you most? And if you want to hear more stories of survival, strength, and transformation, subscribe and stay with us, because there is still so much worth remembering.